Okay, first of all, I want to say thanks for coming on. Like I said, I really appreciate it. I found your book really fascinating, not only because I could identify with some of what Alex was experiencing overseas, and some back here as far as like the health issues, but I also found, Josh, your research and the way you put it all together fascinating. Like, it's the things that we don't talk about. It's the things that we kind of take for granted or just chalk up to the war or burn pits or whatever. And I know a lot of guys that listen to this podcast, and a lot of my buddies have experienced things that are unexplainable. You know, they have these illnesses, these ailments that they kind of put a generic label on, but it's not really, it's kind of undefinable. I think this book shines a light on that particular subject. I think it was great the way you guys broke it all down, went into great detail on what these things could be. I hope everybody buys this book. Like, here, we all were holding it up just a minute ago. This is the book, WARBODY, by Josh Howe and Alexander Lemons. It's a fascinating book. It was a great read. And like I said, Josh, I like the way, and Alex, I like the way you guys went from, Alex would tell a story, and then we would have a chapter that Josh would write about the ailments and kind of where all the origin of some of those ailments came from. Like, this could be this, and especially with the lead. I mean, I don't even think about the lead. Like, all the lead that we've become exposed to, and the lead in the air, the lead in our fingers, the lead in our hats that we pick up the brass with. That really spoke to me. I know it speaks to a lot of guys, because in the old days, even before the war, like, I mean, I came in '91, so, and I know guys that came in the '80s, and it was, nobody thought about that kind of stuff. You know, you just put the brass in your hat, and then you put the hat on your head, and you went and ate lunch or whatever. And I know we only have a short time. I know you guys have a hard out, so please take over. Tell me about the book. And let me know what you want everybody to know about the book. So, yeah, please take over and go ahead.
Yeah, that sounds good. I actually want to ask Alex a couple of questions right off that are going to get us into the book. Right. But Alex, you've got your book cover outfit on.
I do.
And this is like Alex's photo in the book here. I didn't get the memo. I look like I might be just have gotten kicked out of a high school prom or something, but Alex, you look great. So what's the story what's the story of the picture and the on the cover there?
Well, let's see. We got, originally the publisher Norton, basically one of the few still like American owned, American run publishing companies in the country. We both we've been reading Norton since we were, I don't know, teenagers, maybe. So we've always had like a respect for them. We always kind of wanted to go with them. Back in the fall, their publishing team sent us, because we'd finally finished the writing, and then we were in the sexy part, doing the covers and whatnot. And they sent me, Josh came up with the title, WARBODY. But they sent us like an old like language, like on a typewriter. And then they had like an old Vietnam helmet, and I was like, that's the right style, but the wrong flavor. So sure. I went and took my helmet, my Mitch,
nice,
and I put that on the cover. And we tried a whole bunch of different signals like poison, toxic, and then we just went with the crazy, like, is that nuclear? Is that biological? Is that like contaminated agents? And then the color was very military-esque, I guess, like OD green and camo. And I was like, no way. We're going to go for the most basic, annoying Marine Corps colors, gold and red. And when it's sitting on a shelf, you're going to see it because it's so goddamn obnoxious. So that's just to try to get there's a lot of attention grabbing here because
for sure.
I think we're in like a period now with veterans and literature, like everything else in America, if not the world, where we're just like oversaturated in content. There's so much stuff that you forget it.
Right.
And in order to get people's attention, you have to do things a little different, but I've always been a little different. So is Josh. So that's the cover. That's the style of it.
Sure.
I'd like to ask about the cover in part because you look at the cover and it this is in a lot of ways encapsulates what the book's about. We're pretty interested in Alex's stories, obviously. Alex, as you know from reading the book, did 4 tours and then came back in the midst of the last tour, started to get really sick and was having a hard time explaining it. Came back and spent about 10 years trying to figure out what was going on with his health. I met Alex a couple years into that the first time, just for a couple of weeks, when he started a graduate program at the small college I teach at. And then he just disappeared until about 2017, and then showed up again. We started working together on some academic things, and then eventually started this book project. And what the book is really interested in is looking at that helmet and thinking about, okay, so you see a mish on a Marine somewhere, and you think about the violence of bullets and bombs and ordnance explosions. Think of all those kinds of violence associated with warfare, and those are important for sure. But the biohazard symbol reminds us that those are not the only things that veterans are exposed to. Those kinds of like traditional wounds of war are in fact only a small portion of the broad swath of things that affect veterans' health, both in theater and when they come home. And the three that really struck us that overlap in a lot of ways were toxic exposures, which isn't just burn pits. I mean, burn pits are the thing that most of the veteran community knows about because folks at nonprofits like Burn Pits 360 have done such a good job of creating that registry and creating awareness around that. But also everyday things like jet fuel and pesticides, even the dust in Iraq, for example, which on their own might not be too terribly toxic, but when combined, create these pretty significant health effects. Those overlap with the way that veterans experience trauma and PTSD. And those two things also overlap with the way that veterans experience TBI and head injury. A lot of the mechanisms of those things are the same, or at least they affect the same parts of the brain. And we wanted to write a book that used Alex to think about how we think about military personnel and veterans as whole people who've been exposed in all these different ways. To think a little bit differently about what violence looks like and a lot differently about what taking care of people looks like. So that's kind of what the book's about. And I like to use the cover as a starting point for that.
Yeah.
Where were you at in Iraq on your tour?
I did we first got to Mosul. We were in Mosul for a little bit, and then we went to Tikrit, and then Tikrit was pretty easy. We were just training dudes at that time, but when we were in Mosul, it was pretty hairy.
What year?
I was there in 06.
Okay. All right. Do you ever remember the Iron Triangle in like South Baghdad?
I've heard, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
There's there's plenty of iron triangles, but like what Josh was describing, hopefully I can get this.
There you go. You got it.
That's what we're doing when we are presenting the three things that you're getting exposed to or that are getting damaged in the life of not just a veteran, but somebody who's a civilian in the middle of the war is also going to experience these same things, like the Iraqis, the Afghans, anybody in any war in human history. But this is kind of the argument just in picture form in another way. And what we've kind of learned is that it's not as though we're the first people to talk about these three things, but we're the first two to talk about them and say that they're in fact totally interconnected, that you can't treat one without treating the other, that sometimes the effects of one spiral into the other, that the effects of a toxicant like lead, for instance, it can affect not only your mood and like the severity and the style of your PTSD, but it can also affect the functioning of your brain and the recovery of your sleep, which is necessary for overcoming a traumatic brain injury.
Right.
So that's like, if there's only one thing that you take away from the book and you just constantly keep in your mind, it's that your health, not even just if you're not a veteran, this is how your health generally, I think, operates, because the TBIs that we get out here in the US of A are from car crashes.
Right.
Like how many, like by show of hands at home or thus, like how many of you have been evaluated for TBI after a car crash?
Yeah, I don't even know if they do it. I mean, I'm sure they give them a once over, but yeah.
Yeah, but the effects of that can linger long after the actual crash, in the same way that, if you get blown up in 2005, you still might be having the impacts of that. And then they, in turn, influence what's going on with trauma, PTSD, and also what's going on with the chemicals. And it gets so rinsed up that it's sometimes hard to separate.
Sure.
The organization of the book is all kind of based around that.
Okay.
And the book I think the original book is probably like 700 pages long.
I
But
wanted more, man. I want that copy.
no. When we sat down to create this in 2019, we said that there's no way in hell. Well, even earlier, 2018, there was no way in hell this would be longer than 300 pages, and it would be an airport read.
Okay.
So we've tried to condense that, and also the organization of the parts is very strategic. Lead is so, as you were mentioning, it's just kind of understudied, even though we have tons of scientific evidence about just how bad it is for the human body in any amount.
Right.
But it's such a daily component of being, well, a pogue or a grunt. I mean, it's just part of the mix of being at war is being exposed to lead.
Right.
So we're starting there with toxicants, and then we kind of build up into each part of the triangle. We have a whole section dedicated to TBI and helmets, and then we take a look at toxicants, but we kind of go into dust, we go into PFAS, and then on and on and on.
Yeah.
If we kept listing them, it would just, like you said, the book would be like 800 pages long. So
there was some times when I was like, well, what's it lost me, frankly. I mean, there's so much detail, not in a bad way, but like it overwhelms you with like, you don't think about any of the stuff you just don't think about it. And it blew my mind really. Go ahead, Josh. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Let's not forget that, like, interspersed with our deep dives into these substances is this really compelling narrative about your experience as first an infantry grunt and eventually a scout sniper working on a special detail under Petraeus, which I think, for folks who are a little bit wary of the details of the science, there's this story to follow,
right?
That is your story, and I think that it's worth noting that Alex opens himself up in this book in ways that you don't see in a lot of writing about warfare, and you get to see him develop as a Marine over the course of these tours, but also as a person, as a veteran when he comes back, and that ability to write through that in an organized and compelling way, alongside these kind of deep dives into toxicants and trauma and micrograms per deciliter, really gives you something to follow. So there's this old John McPhee idea that when you're writing about something complicated in the non-human world, you have to, in his words, find a horse and ride it. And Alex is a pretty sturdy steed through this whole trajectory. And if we think about like the lead chapter that opens the book, I mean, we can talk all you want about lead and the number of thousands of statues of liberty's worth of lead that the U.S. military puts into ordnance every year, but it doesn't really hit home unless you follow Alex through the stories of training and like all of the marksmanship and weapons maintenance and shooting that makes it make sense. So, Alex, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like that consistency is accuracy chapter, and just kind of walk us through what we were thinking and what your story is, and then how we made that into the first chapter.
Obviously, it's got sniper in the title, so why not start the book with a whole bunch of shooting episodes? But that's kind of a lap dance. That's what I think of a lot of the stories that I'm telling about myself, is that it's more important that you get into the science, but there has to be a way that we can show the science in a way that's not boring, but that's just very effective at showing it. And that's what we did in that chapter, is to show you kind of like, okay, this is the training of anybody who's going to go into a sniper platoon, and how many rounds that you'll fire and how many thousands of rounds, but also like what a round actually looks like. People think of lead and bullets and they just think of the bullet itself and not the primer. And when you go pew bang, there was an explosion of lead gas that propels that round through the rifling, which tears off a whole bunch of lead to get it to spin, right? And so you're getting fragments of lead coming out of the barrel, but mostly you're getting the blast that's coming out of the bolt housing group, right? Or the magazine or whatever kind of weapon system you got.
Right.
That dust of explosion is going around. You're not wearing a mask. Even if you were, whether it's a gas mask or N95, and I've shot like with both, you're still going to be, unless it's really good fitting and insanely good filtration, you're still going to be taking this material that might be invisible to our eyes, but it's there at the subatomic level.
Mhm.
And then it's going into your nose and your mouth, into your lungs, and then into your bloodstream. And then possibly, as Josh kind of lays out, in your body, when it sees a calcium atom and a lead atom, that's what it sees. They're not different to the body. So it will absorb those in, push them into lead, push them into soft tissues, sometimes into your brain, because like sneaking through this whole like blood-brain barrier that you have that protects your brain, and that's how you're slowly accumulating. It's not like you just go to the range one day and then, oh my God, you're a fucking Mad Hatter,
Right.
or you can't remember where you live or your birthday. Those kind of like effects, which especially like for lead or like kind of long-term memory problems, those may not show up for like decades.
Sure.
And like I'm a severe case, so is like any other infantryman listening out here, like the amount of rounds that we fire. But there's still lead in other things, especially like when we had gasoline that was leaded in this country, right?
Right.
And in Iraq, they still have leaded gasoline. But it's that slow kind of accumulation that's kind of building up and building up and building up. And as the book goes forward in my deployments, you can kind of see that my health is like, I'm in peak condition, but I'm also like slowly starting to deteriorate. And it's not until I have this kind of big moment in 2010 where my health really falls apart and mono seems to be like the cause. But if you're paying attention with the way we structured the chapters and the argument we're making, it's that lead is probably having an effect on my immune system, which then activates that mono that I've got in my body forever. And boom, that's what mono does. It's kind of like a zombie in your body. It lives in B cells in your bones. And when there's like an opportunity to just like make and reproduce itself like zombie hordes, it comes out. So it's just been very, very slow poisoning. And it's not because I, or even the Marine Corps, like intentionally wanted to poison ourselves. We just got to fucking train.
Right.
And we got to be better at this job than we were yesterday. So, and like, especially with my experiences, which on the whole, I don't know about you, but I was just like, largely disappointed with the entire U.S. military. I don't want to say I was naive and like thought it was going to be better than it was, but I just was kind of disappointed about competence, poor leadership, and because of like a lot of mistakes made in 2003 and 2004, I just like learned from that. When I was the chief scout in charge of all the training, I went fucking crazy on training.
Yeah.
Like I loved it, but that means I was exposing people to lead
Right.
at through the roof levels. And let's see what the consequences are going to be. These are the ones that have been on me, right?
Right.
And lead is just like a small part of this like smorgasbord of different things.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of what that chapter is trying to show you. It's just the concentration that we all have to have on our job means that if there had been a class and there had been like, you know, I don't know, some master sergeant who came out and said, this is going to be your period of instruction on lead poisoning, all of us were probably not going to pay attention to it because we're like, yeah, well, we have a job to do and I'm not going to be able to wear this mask. And maybe what you should do is try to figure out a way to build like a leadless fucking primer.
Right.
Weapons, because I don't have time for that. So I think that's how a lot of this is happening. I don't think any of us intentionally are going out there to harm ourselves. It's just that this is what I have control over in my life. And I mean, it's the same if it's a second lieutenant or maybe a battalion commander all the way down to a PFC, but that's what you have control over. And you're going to do that to the max to prepare your guys and gals.
Right. And that led to the rounds, or that's like a common denominator between all of us. That's something we all do, whether, regardless of where you serve, that's what we're all kind of exposed to. And I think there, like you said, there is some mention of like, hey, be careful. This lead is not good for you. Obviously it's lead, but we're all like, whatever, dude. Like I said, we put it in our hat and we go eat chow and it's in our fingers. And you kind of alluded to in the book, or maybe came right out and said it, but it's not just the ingestion through the air. It's like on the skin and, all that stuff is, you can absorb it through all that, your skin and whatever.
Yeah, your skin is just one big tongue.
Right.
You think about the way you walk around in life, it's just here and it's like, it absorbs things.
Right.
And then when the pores get bigger because you're sweating like crazy and you're warmer, then there's like bigger absorption into the tongue.
Yeah, figuring out I like that you said, JD, it's a common denominator among so many service personnel because training is fire and weapons. It's like one of the key things you do. It was pretty fun trying to figure out like how to show some of this like exposure, because one of the big problems that Alex and I found from the early part of GWAT was that nobody's being tested for any of this stuff. Yeah. That's something that's thankfully changing, but no one's got baselines. And testing for blood lead, like you're not actually testing. Blood lead clears relatively quickly, but there can still be lead in other parts of your body. Sure. But it turns out there's these other organizations other than the U.S. military that care a lot about shooting and studied this stuff. So we were looking at like LAPD studies from the 90s and this really interesting FBI study to try to figure out like what if there's like a per round lead ratio, which it's like a magic thing we never found. But then there was this really cool Israeli Defense Forces study that actually really was looking at blood lead in response to shooting. And we had the number of rounds they were shooting in trainings and over what periods and under what conditions. And Alex had shooting logs. So we were able to see pretty clearly, like, okay, so here are the results of this Israeli Defense Forces study. And we can compare that to what a scout sniper's doing. And so we can't come up with a specific number. That's a forever unknown. But we can come up with like a ballpark of exposure, and it's really high.
Right.
And that was for us like this eye-opening kind of starting point. That's like, oh, we can actually do some of this work. Like we don't have to be. We'll never know for sure, but we don't have to be totally guessing. And that set the stage for a lot of the other kind of stuff that we did, where it's like, okay, if we don't know what specifically happened to Alex, there's other populations out there that are getting tested and monitored, whose experiences at least have some bearing on Alex's. And so we were able to kind of like use Alex's tours to walk through this whirlwind of toxicity that is the global war on terror. And it's alarming in a lot of ways. And also as an intellectual exercise, pretty fascinating to kind of see the pieces come together.
I mean, that's a good point. It's like you may not know exactly to what degree it's affecting, but the data shows that it's affecting you negatively. You don't have to have the exact numbers to know that it's a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, look at Flint, Michigan.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody there is firing thousands and thousands of rounds, but they were drinking leaded water, and the consequences have been very similar to my own health. And in like the studies upon studies of different populations that we've looked at lead, and there's just like different ways that you can kind of measure lead. That's the problem with a lot of this stuff that we found, similar to what Josh is mentioning. Like the only definitive way, and this is like what I would pursue if I were in charge of the VA, is I would like go to families and ask with them to see if we could autopsy every veteran, because an autopsy is the definitive way of like trying to see, okay, how many cells and atoms of like mercury are in you and where are they at? Because with the body alive, we can like, there's baby teeth. Of course that changes as you get old and you don't want to pull out, teeth. Hair is kind of useful, but it's not great. Blood, as we said before, you could like do a blood test on somebody 2 weeks after they go to the range, and what you might actually find is nothing in the blood. because it's now being absorbed and hidden elsewhere. So we
Right.
don't really have great tools to say exactly, like put a meter on you and say, that's how many pieces of forever chemical are in you. We're not there yet. So this is the way that we've had to do this. And as Josh says in the beginning, I'm like a sample size of one. So we have to, we've kind of tried to walk this insane. I think we've achieved it, but like we're on this balancing rope that's like 300 pages long. And, you know, I'm an example out of thousands of guys and gals who are in the service, but I also don't quite fit into the studies because there aren't really a lot of studies on me. So we have to be very careful about assuming that everybody else is like me, but at the same time saying, yeah, there's a lot of similarities. So maybe the best that we can do is show me as an example within all this crap. And then you're going to have to figure that out as a veteran family, as a civilian. I think as anybody living right now in 2025 across planet Earth.
Yeah.
Until the VA or even like private medicine can like actually start doing this kind of study on the whole population. Because I think what we're going to find out is that everybody out here, that's what we ended up calling as historical anatomy, is going to have like some crazy history of car crashes, being raised on like a farm where they're spraying everything in like methyl mercury as like a fungicide to kill off bacteria and whatnot. And then I don't know, you could be raised in an abusive home or experience sexual assault or anything else. And when you put all that together, you're going to get trouble.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's guys out there that go into the VA and they have symptoms, but then maybe they don't give all the data to the doc. You know, it might not even be the doc's fault. You know, sometimes we forget about these things we're exposed to. You know, yeah, burn pits are like, that's the big buzzword now, but there's also so many other things that, like you said, even the dust over there. Like, I mean, first of all, ingesting dust is not good, but then what's in that dust? You know, like, I mean, there could be so many things. And that's the thing I loved about your book was that, like I said, it was overwhelming with information, and it was like, even if you didn't quite understand, like frankly, there were some times I was like, I don't get this, but I understood the concept of it, right? I didn't understand the details, but I was like, I could identify that this was bad, you know? So it can help guys that may have gone through what Alex has gone through, or maybe worse or better or whatever, either way, but it gives them a way to kind of illustrate how they're feeling. Alex, I like to have guys like you on because it gives other people a license to go seek help for things that they might not normally seek help for, but also as an example of what to ask about, you know, like, oh man, I didn't even think about that.
Alex, I've got a question for you that I haven't asked you before. We spent like 6 years digging through stuff. We started off with these like marathon interviews in my tiny little office. And then we're digging through stuff. Of all the things that we found, what surprised you the most? What was the thing that like popped your eyes more than anything else?
I still think it's the influence on, okay, just having PTSD, whatever your cause, is bad, but PTSD is easily chemically influenced, right? Because PTSD is heart and mind, but those things are organs and they have chemical processes going on. What was crazy to me is how much that PTSD could be influenced by lead, or PTSD could be influenced by a knock to the head. So I think that was a big eye opener to me because I've been writing this book as I've been recovering, and I keep like getting better. But what I noticed was as I increased the detoxification and a lot of the things that I have always like, I don't know, just I went down the traditional route. I went to counseling at the VA. I did medications for a while. But I always felt like I was like hitting a ceiling, and I was just like, what is going on here? This can't possibly be something that is being missed by them or me. That's where the lights really went off, is that the more that I had learned about that stuff, the more that I read your stuff and then I put it into mine, then I was like, I've worked on this PTSD thing as much as it can go forward. And until I get more like lead out of my body, or I just like have better sleep, which you need to remove waste from your brain. Like, I'm not going to make any more progress on this front. So I think that was like the most eye-opening thing, because it just reinforced that it's not one thing, that you've got to chase like multiple things at once.
JD, I've got to iterate just how wild it was in some circumstances to be working with Alex through this process, because like you're collaborating with somebody, and I know Alex is a smart guy. I know his record, and I knew him personally, but like to watch him get smarter and like better at organizing ideas, things that are like common to watch among like 18 to 22-year-olds, but happening to somebody my age, and not just because you're learning new things, but because like it's almost like a brain plasticity thing where all of a sudden Alex is like, and so like watching him get better and having get better be getting smarter is a wild process as a co-author, right? Because like, at the
You're
beginning,
like watching him heal as the process goes.
Yeah, well, and getting better is also like being a co-author, right? So like
Sure.
initially I had to like he handed me a stack of research that was pretty suspect at the beginning of this, because he's like searching for any answer he can find. I mean, it's
Sure.
being sick is like in these ways, it's no joke, right? Like the brain fog compromises your ability to interpret exactly the information that you need to interpret to be able to figure out how to get better. And at a certain point, you become like a seeker, like just looking for any answer. It's like the desperation, and Alex taught me this more than anybody else, right? The desperation of the sick person like really shapes the way that you see these things. And so a lot of the initial research that Alex had done reflected that. It was good. I mean, it's good for me to read this stuff, but sometimes I was like, what are we looking at here? And then to watch over the course of 6 years as like he went from that to like pushing me in a variety of areas. Like most of the stuff on head injuries, like Alex was pushing me into new research, and it was pretty remarkable to watch that transition over the 6 years.
Well, I mean, you know how we feel when we get a cold or, we get the flu, you feel like your life's on hold. You can't really do anything. You don't feel, you're just like kind of muddling through, you're running on autopilot. Alex, how long were you sick? Like how long would you say you had this debilitating illness?
Honestly, I didn't feel the first summer that I really felt things take off would have been the summer of 2019. And the first time I really fell hard was the summer of 2010.
Okay.
So, like literally, like I'd moved up there a whole bunch of reasons to Portland, Oregon. And I'm a fly fisherman. So I was out there on the Clackamas, and I've got like a 5-weight rod, and the thing feels like 500 pounds in my arm. So fast forward, I basically kind of gave up on fishing. I gave up on a lot of things during that whole 2010 to 2019, like 9-year period, even though I was slowly getting better.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until 2019 that I got another rod, and then I started fishing, and then it's just kind of slowly been up and up and up since 2019.
Wow. So that 9 years essentially, or almost a decade of just of just trying to get by, just trying to like feel,
I'd say to Josh's point, there were a lot of again, I had to go outside, not just the VA, but private medicine. So I went down some we're in COVID time, right?
Sure.
And so there's been a lot of that's conspiratorial, that thing don't work. Listen to this science. And it's like, well, I'm not getting better. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. Well, my initial feeling, say we were talking about lead earlier and why that's, earlier in the book, when I first got diagnosed with heavy metals poisoning, to me, that was like it. Boom, 2012. I had a doctor who was like, this is what's going on. And I was like, it's mercury. So all I did from 2012 to 2019 was trying to chase mercury.
Yeah.
And that was helpful, but at the same time, I was blindsiding myself to all the different other things that were a possibility. And I just kind of exhausted that, didn't get any more from chelation, even though it was benefiting for me. And then I started to kind of reassess and look at other things like like for instance, mononucleosis is like this crazy long-term virus, and you get malaise, you get this bullshit diagnosis called what is it called? Constant fatigue, fibromyalgia. It's
Okay.
the ultimate nonsensical diagnosis in modern America. It's like when a doctor's just like, we have no idea why you're not recovering. Like, right?
Yeah.
So, I it took a while because the process was so long, and maybe I was looking at the wrong things. I think maybe now I would do things differently. I mean, I do things differently as far as like if I were in charge of the Marine Corps or the Army and I had guys and gals getting out, that last like 6 months, I would be doing like a crazy workup on everything. I'd
Yeah.
send them through the tube. I'd evaluate them for TBI. I'd try to do all this different testing that we've shown for different exposures, and then counseling and see like where you're at on a score, because that'll be an easier transition from the one that most of us went through in the story of my crazy war body, you know?
Right. Man, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that back up because we were talking about PTSD, and we're like, well, he can just go to counseling, or we can just throw some drugs at him, but it's like but to your point, like you're forgetting there might be something in there that's hindering his ability to process information, or it's a physical thing that's stopping
Yeah.
him. It's not just a mental, oh, I got blown up, so now I'm freaking out every time I see a plastic bag in the street. It's like, yeah, that might be the case, but also there's a bunch of lead and mercury and all kinds of other crap in your body that's preventing you from getting better. So
Did you ever get evaluated for a TBI at like
no,
VA?
I was never in any kind of I know.
Have you been hit in the face?
I know, I know exactly. As I say that, I'm thinking like, oh, I had a bad parachute falls, and I've had all this other stuff. So not really. I mean, So yeah, I know exactly. I should probably
Should.
go back in and get at least evaluated.
Well, and I was surprised too, because I've gone through like different iterations and levels now of like TBI screening. So I've gone through like the most basic bitch one, and then I've gone through a 4-hour session where I was like, I looked like some lab rat, but at a gym. So I was just covered in diodes and taping things and
Yeah.
structures like wrapped around my brain and hooked up to diodes. And I was like having to follow instructions for 4 hours as I walked around a building
Jeez.
to get evaluated for that. And what I learned was just like how much more, and I was going through this TBI screening with a whole bunch of football players from the University of Utah, because one of my buddies was getting his PhD in brain physiology, anatomy. Anyway, so I was in that camp and I was getting to watch them, and I'm like, yeah, I probably have some similar stuff.
Yeah.
But because the test was so long and detailed, I was like, wow, a TBI could be a lot more subtle and be affecting way more parts of your life than you care to admit.
Right.
Especially not just like the physical stuff or throwing a pass or, whatever, but like actually being attentive and paying attention to what people are saying.
Yeah.
And your recall, which is going to affect your job, relationships, parenting, whatever else.
Right. Yeah, I think you're just in one of those three. You're just trying to identify one of the problems instead of an all-encompassing kind of cause of your ailments. I mean, this is why I was fascinated with this book. This is why I wanted you guys on, because I don't think people think about it like this. I don't think, maybe they do. Not everybody does, and I definitely don't. When I go to the VA, whether I talk to somebody or get a physical evaluation, there's like two separate things, but when we should be combining the whole thing.
That's it. So the propaganda is working on your brain right now.
It really is.
I got to say, we do have to give the VA their due. Like that organization, the VHA, is uniquely set up to be able to handle these things.
Mm.
The funding challenges that they've faced have compromised those efforts, but as an organization, in the 90s, when the VA had funding for this kind of research, they were driving a lot of the research that helped us know some of this stuff. The VA cooperated with Congress in the 90s to try to figure out what was going on with Gulf War illness. They have a long-term relationship with the NIH doing studies on Gulf War illness still. Just started in 2022. And they're like the they are an organization that their mandate and their structure enables them to both research and treat exactly the kinds of overlapping exposures that we're so concerned about in this book. So we give them a hard time, I think, for being a bureaucracy.
Sure.
But it's not that's not a hard time for not being an organization that cares about these things. I think they really do. They operate under different mandates. One thing that happened while we were writing this book was Congress passed the PACT Act in 2022. If you don't know what the PACT Act is, it's an act for honoring our veterans. Essentially codifies the promise that Congress makes to take care of veterans after they've served. And it laid the groundwork for providing both disability and health care for, there's like 1 million new cases for veterans. Some of it's like burn pits and the K2 base in where's that? It's in Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. But they also, if you read that act closely, they mandate research on overlapping exposures. That's like part of what that does. So there's a lot of good potential. Again, like we give
like
the
they're
VA
working
a
on
little bit of
it.
a hard time.
Yeah.
Well, to the extent that they're allowed to work on it, they're working on it. And Congress gave them a mandate to work on it. So it's a thing to keep an eye on, because that to me is like the best. That's the highest and best of what the VA can do.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure that
we're not trying to discount the VA.
This is the organization that we think is probably best set up to deal with this. And currently, like, one of the people we talked to in this book, or that I talked to, is this guy who's an emergency room doctor, who's a toxicologist. He actually takes shifts at the VA. It's like part of what he does. He was telling me that there's as a toxicologist at the VA, there's no way he would ever even like see Alex, because his training and his niche at the VA is acute toxicity, because that's the box you got to check. And so there's no way that someone like Alex would ever find him, even though he's somebody who has the knowledge to be able to put some of these pieces together. Also talked to a private practitioner who's a university doctor, who's a rheumatologist, who it's like a real life Dr. House, like this woman this is what she does.
Sure.
And she said the same thing. She's like, yeah, there's no way, like, given the symptoms, given the other things going on, there's just no way that Alex would have found his way to her office, because the system is designed to catch one thing at a time. And so his PTSD exposure, and this is what happened in the VA, right? Just directs him down that road immediately. Even though, like, I'm looking at Alex's forms, right? One of the things that we have, and maybe Alex, you can talk about the legality of why we have these things, but are Alex's post-deployment health assessments, which are these forms.
You remember those?
Oh yeah, this is the joke. Yeah,
totally. So we have all of Alex's. I'm looking at his, and there's like the PTSD questionnaire. It's like, yeah, okay, this based on what I understand of these PDHAs, this indicates PTSD for sure. And if you look on the other side about toxic exposures, literally every category is marked high exposure the whole way down.
Yeah.
There's at least as much evidence that this guy's got something going on from toxic exposures. And then you see the note from whoever is filing these things, and it says probable PTSD, refer to psychiatry, right? Nothing about the exposures.
Yeah.
And so it's like, we've got to figure out a way for folks like Alex and so many other veterans to be able to get screened for a bunch of different things.
Right.
And we can't, the fancy word for what the VA and other bureaucracies do is satisfice, which is like the first answer that fits rather than the best answer, is what they pick. It's called satisficing. And it's a really important thing in some occasions, like under serious time pressure. You've all done it in the field, I bet, but it's not probably how we should deal with veterans' health. So one of the things I think is so hopeful about the PACT Act is that it hasn't created the mechanisms, but it's mandated that there are mechanisms to be able to screen for different things and change that paradigm a little bit.
And that's why I think it's important to have guys like you on here because, yeah, we're ultimately responsible for our own health. So if you walk into the VA and they don't give you and they don't address these things that we're talking about right now people have the knowledge to say, wait a minute, I heard about this. What about, can I get this toxicity screen or and maybe this is affecting my PTSD? It's giving guys the tools to go in there and kind of advocate for themselves.
Those doctors are going to hate us, right?
Right.
Because I bet 85% of the time, 90% of the time, I bet that the thing they told you is probably right.
Sure.
Yeah.
But for the 10% of the time where it's not, or someone's not getting better, there's some tools to at least know what questions to ask. And like I said, those doctors are going to hate us. And that's fine. As long as there's some folks getting better faster because of it, we're cool with that.
I mean, it's almost like VA doc roulette because I've talked to some guys that don't live in my area, and they're like, man, it sucks at the VA. But my VA is great. And every time I go in there, I'm like, hey, dude, I need to check this out. And he's like, cool, I'll give you a referral today. And so maybe this could be an exposure to that. Like, hey, maybe we should all standardize this VA system so all the docs are very receptive to, a guy's request to check something out because it could be a bad thing. Yeah, the doc is the expert and he's probably, the guy may be a hypochondriac, but it's not really our job to kind of say that stuff. It's like, all right, let's humor him. Let's get him checked out and then we'll put it to bed, But not getting it put to bed and not humoring the guy, you can wind up like Alex and go for like a decade of, feeling horrible. So,
Yeah.
Well, hey, do you have anything? I know you guys wanted to keep this to an hour. We're coming up on that. We haven't really gone into who you guys are.
I can give you an extra 20 minutes.
Okay. I'll stay here all day.
Josh has got to go. All right.
I think it's important that you guys feel satisfied that the information that you want people to know about the book is out. You know what I mean? I want to give you the opportunity to say all that stuff. And I would like, get a quick little bio, if you guys don't mind.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that I want to make sure that folks understand is that as we got into a lot of details of some of the science and the medicine, but it's a really fun book to read.
It is.
It's put together in a way that I don't think a lot of books are put together. And if you didn't pick it up from JD's description earlier, we alternate voices. So each chapter is by one of us. Alex focuses predominantly on his experiences serving and then getting sick and then trying to figure out what on earth is wrong with him over the course of 15 years. And I intersperse those with chapters on the places that Alex went, the kinds of things he was exposed to and why those things were there in the first place. And it's pretty rangy. It's everywhere from how to understand how the dust in Iraq is different from the dust in your backyard in the desert in Utah, to why we should think about World War I differently, knowing what we know about PTSD and toxic exposures. So it's a really fun read. I think that's it's easy to get lost in the science, but man, it's a bit of a ripper,
I concur. I love it. It was I blew through it. I mean, it was great.
As for the bios, I appreciate the opportunity to sort of lay that out there. I'm eternally skeptical of people who lean on the letters, as they say. Like, if you put PhD after your name when you write a book, I won't read it.
All right.
I'm, as you said, I'm a professor of history and environmental studies at a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. I did a lot of work on the politics of climate change when I was getting my PhD, and my first couple books are about that. Started writing a little bit more about American foreign policy and the kinds of materials that were flown around the world and being toxic in different places during the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And then I met Alex in this master's program that I'm affiliated with there. And Alex showed up in a couple of my classes and started talking to me about his experiences. We became friends because we're both Giants fans, like the San Francisco Giants. And but also because, I don't have a lot of non-traditional students in those classes. And
sure,
Alex is a pretty interesting guy. And so eventually we started talking about his experiences and my research and kind of hatched the plan for the book. And so suddenly I'm a military historian, which I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be, but here I am. You follow your nose and that's where it leads.
Sure. Hey, Alex, you want to go into a quick down and dirty on your military history?
Oh, I don't know. 80s neoliberal baby, war on terror made me. I signed up like 3 days after 9/11. I was an undergrad then. enlisted in the Marine Corps. I was just with a line battalion, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. Did that. I don't know. Some days I think that this life that I'm now living, like the writer veteran guy, is way weirder than what I did, in my time.
Right.
I was there for the invasion. Did 2004, was in Najaf, a big fight in there. Then Phantom Fury, did that. Came home, did a Westpac, and then we floated over in 06, and we're the reserve in Iraq. And then my last deployment, I was a special assistant to CG, to Petraeus. So I was in the think tank. Kind of a really super weird gig. Maybe I'll be able to write about it later. And then I re-enlisted, got flagged with recruiting, told the Marine Corps to pound sand, and then eventually just have been trying to readjust to, the post, like not having the war kind of life. And I've done a lot of things. While I was working on this master's degree with Josh, I also worked on an applied science degree in environmental restoration. So that's like my day job, is I clean up polluted streams and wetlands. And I've been managing 1,500 acres up in the mountains here in Utah, with Utah State University for a couple of years. And I guess I'm just like a part-time writer. So I do a little bit of part-time this, part-time that. I want to be good at lots of things. I've never been very good at specialization.
So, except sniping guys, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think of that's maybe another reason why I wrote the book, because there's no ghostwriting here. Like Josh has his own parts, I have my own parts. Like nobody is putting words in our mouths, because there's a lot of stuff that's been written now. And if you didn't do the writing, then I always have a little bit of a red flag. My bullshit detector kind of goes a little up. But
yeah, for sure.
I think one of the things that I've tried to do in the book is, there's some sniping, but it's kind of more about like what the art and the science of it is, which is more observation, especially now that we don't have snipers in the Marine Corps. I mean, that's just weird to me. But I think mostly what I've tried to do in my parts of the book is obviously be true to those experiences. So like, that's wartime, but also try to ground it in like reality, which is that there's a lot of hurry up and wait. There's a lot of boredom. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of why are we here? So again, tried to cram a lot of just like the truth into the book, and hopefully we've carried it off.
So, I think so. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of guys that watch this podcast that can identify with a lot of the things you said. It's very, very familiar I'm glad you mentioned that thing about the detail of the marksmanship. I mean, that part was very fascinating, especially for guys that shoot a lot. The way you kind of described the method and the concept and the training program. I thought that was pretty fascinating too.
Yeah, and I want to like also be clear, like the book could be another 600 pages if Josh and I sat down and said, okay, this is how we're going to fix the military to ensure that people don't get exposures, but we're not going into that. It would make the book longer. And that's like a big debate that we now have to have as like a country, not just keep this thing private to the military, but all of us have to get involved. And like, am I here to say, let's ban all lead, no more shoot? I'm not saying that either, but I'm saying you need to be warned. You need to know what the fuck you're getting into, and that these things will have consequences. And so if that's going to be the way it is, then maybe we need to mitigate that somehow. Maybe we need to come up with like a leadless primer. I mean, lead as a bullet is still stable as fuck. That's why you want it to be coasting out of the mouth of a barrel, because it's so heavy and dense, and especially when it's got torque and twist, it's going to be stable in its flight. So we've got now like a whole discussion, especially here in Utah, because we've been having like a whole bunch of like very rare California condors like come back, and they're like all dead with lead poisoning. And so a lot of people have said it's the hunters. Again, it's not entirely clear if it's the hunters or if the birds are eating mice and rodents and rabbits that have lead in them from mines, from water. And so again, we're not here to tell the military what to do or what not to do. I think what we're trying to do primarily is to get you to start having a new conception and a way of seeing the world. And that is what's going to drive the policy decisions, whether it's in the military or veterans, and the way we're going to treat people after these things going forward.
Yeah, that makes
JD,
sense. Go ahead, Josh.
I got to run here. Thanks so much for having us on. One thing I got to note, Alex will never do this because he's not a self-promoter, but he's talking about his part-time writing. He's got a really good piece in High Country News that came out last month. If you just Google Alex Lemon's High Country News, all about the promise and possibility of restoration as a way of healing. I'd highly recommend it. It's a great piece. Thanks again for having us on. Check out the book. Alex, you might. Yeah, I don't know if you're staying, Alex, but I'm going.
I'll stay for a couple. Thanks, man.
Take it easy. Thanks, JD.
All right. Here, let me like make this more concrete because it'll be useful for people at home. All right. You said you joined in 91, 90s, and you got out in
2014.
Holy shit, man! What'd you get out as?
E8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you were to kind of cram yourself into this, I'm assuming you have troubles, like health troubles, personal troubles.
Sure.
Again, it's all on a spectrum, right? But I think anybody who goes through this experience, and I don't get too deep into this, like I was a grunt, you're a pogue. I don't give a shit about that. I love pogues. I hate mercenaries and contractors. I'll be very honest about that. But
right.
One of the things that I, especially kind of like in the chapter on helmets, right, is that if I have a buddy who's a computer tech, and he's been blown up a few times in Afghanistan, but he sat on a fob. So you'd think, oh, well, his experiences were nothing compared to mine. But when you're in a Humvee, I don't give a shit what your MOS is, and you get blown up, a TBI is going to affect you the same way, wearing the same helmets as anybody else. So
yeah, 100%.
When you kind of read this book and you're like, okay, let me test this theory in my own body. You should make a map of that triangle that I showed you and just be like, okay, what were my head injuries? Have I had a TBI screening? And then go and look at your history, especially like if you've done the burn pits registry, which I encourage everybody to do, because it will make you go back and think about like, oh yeah, I was on fucking Camp Twin Towers. This is 2003. It was in Hashemiyah, southern Iraq. Well, I was burning the honey pots, if you ever did that.
Yeah, right.
And what were we using? JP5. But we also cut barrels that were filled with God knows what, leaded gasoline. I don't know.
Right.
And then we had the burn pits right next to the barracks. And then that's all downrange. You got to remember there's bases and things and exposures that are here. So if we think about Camp Lejeune, for instance, there has been, so that's in North Carolina. That's where 2nd Marine Division is at. They have had, from like the 80s through the 90s, they had high leaks of what's called TCE. It's a trichloroethylene, but it's really good in getting like stains out of your uniforms and breaking up debris on like brakes and trucks. So it's perfect. Problem is, both like at the dry cleaners and at the motor T pool, that stuff was leaking into the water system. And then veterans and veteran families on the base were absorbing this stuff, and it is carcinogenic, and it leads to like different brain problems and brain dysfunction, because we've done studies now of people who live around a dry cleaner, and they found a lot of like dementia, Alzheimer's, ALS symptoms in those people. So if you take that and then you put it on the veteran families and then you put it on the veterans, it's like, okay, so I had burn pits here, I had TCE here at Lejeune, and then we have that third leg of the stool or the triangle, which is, trauma. And maybe you didn't see anything terrible, but maybe you had a really screwed up childhood. And
Right.
if that's, once you've kind of established that in your history, that's kind of ultimately, that's all I care about in the book, as far as like what you get out of it, is now you can say, okay, which part of this is the most severe? Have I solved it? Have I figured out if that thing is affecting me? And it will like make the task of healing, of getting better, like what we all want. But in this new day and age, it's very hard when you have those multiple things happening. And if it's just a totally disorganized mess, it's going to be harder for you to actually sort it out and figure it out.
Oh, for sure.
So that's maybe something that you'll be activated to think about, is to like go through like every base that you were stationed on, and to maybe go through the internet, go through the EPA, just talk to friends and see if they've had similar exposures or similar health problems. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have any friends who have come out of this unspared. And I'm talking about guys who have never got blown up.
Right.
Or they've been shot at, but not wounded. I wasn't wounded, but that's not necessarily a guarantee of anything.
Right. I mean, there's inherent dangers and exposures that we may not be aware of, and that we're all kind of just being in that environment. And I mean, frankly, just being in a foreign country like that is an exposure of itself. A third. I mean, we call it third world, but essentially it is. I mean, the hygiene is not as good. So there's all kinds of different aspects. And
yeah, did you ever get Saddam's revenge?
well, not really.
So especially, this is wild because like we're having like a spate of crazy norovirus right now going through the US. Like it came off the ships, and now people are like going crazy. So I was like taking care of my girlfriend a couple weeks ago, and she's got the vomit and the diarrhea going on simultaneously. I'm like,
oh man, I bet she's gonna be happy that you told us that.
Yeah, but at least you're not like carrying a saw and having to do that in your boots and utilities,
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had a guy. I mean, this wasn't in Iraq; it was in Afghanistan. But I had our team sergeant one time had the exact same thing going on, and he was laying in the back of the truck while we're on this convoy going to this target. And he's barely hanging on, and he's just such a hard charger. He didn't want to stay behind. But yeah, it's the same deal.
Really?
You're trying to deal with the stuff as you're, as he's, it's coming out of both ends.
So I was playing nursemaid, right? That's one of my jobs, right? And I was just remembering, because this is in the book as well, but I was remembering like what the corpsman gave me, antibiotics, like an anti-nausea drug, and some sleeping material. And one of the things that we've learned about, like with the dust and like polluted water in Iraq, is that when you combine that with the overprescription of antibiotics for the last 50 years, it's created what we call a lot of superbugs. So there's like gut bugs in hospitals now that cannot be killed with antibiotics. And I'm not like against antibiotics. It's just that you have to use it. It's a nuclear weapon.
Sure.
Put it in the body. So, but because we've overprescribed it, now these things that it used to work on, it's like immune to it. So this is like another thing that you throw into the body, is the gut. And how many guys and gals who have been living on the ship, or living downrange, or living on a fob, or living off the MRE with no fiber and no sauerkraut, no probiotics, and just like whatever,
sure.
Right? That's what you got to do. Or like taking like an Iraqi, like a sweet cup of tea, and it's like 3/4 full of sugar, and you're just pounding that all the time, right?
Right.
That effect on your gut is long term, and that effect on your gut also affects your mood. So there's some people we're finding now who just have severe depression because they have like low levels of good bacteria in their stomach.
Right.
So this is like yet another thing to go on that crazy chart of, I used to, like for me, it's vastly improved, but there was that there was like a 10-year period where I was not having any gluten. I was never having any dairy, which means like you're not having a lot of fun.
Right.
Because those foods are all wrapped up in America with, baseball, whatever,
Sure.
hanging out.
Right.
So it's just, you can see how complex the body is and how war can easily just upturn the whole thing, especially with the more complex war becomes, which is definitely what we've seen in our time. I'm not saying that war was never hard at any other point. It's just very different in the sense that we have so many different things that are happening now. Like 500
Right.
years ago, you wouldn't have had to worry about, I don't know,
Depleted uranium or stuff like
sure,
that.
sure, or like burn pits full of plastic and tires roasting. It would have just been like, you're going to get gangrene, you're going to get a bayonet in the face, and yeah, you'll get probably a little bit of lead exposure because you're ripping the old casket, the little pouch of lead powder out and
All
putting
right.
it in the barrel. So what we've done is just, I think, taken a lot that was already there and just intensify it like crazy. And plus, even before you go and join up, you think about all the different exposures that we're having now in the United States, like forever chemicals, lead. We have people growing up in homes that have lead paint. Lead paint, when you're a kid, you eat it because it's sweet. That's why they used to put it in wine under the Romans. So it's just, it, the intent of the book is not to scare people. It's to just make you feel like, okay, I can figure out more about my own situation because I know me and I know where I lived.
Right.
And maybe I won't know 100%, but I'll be able to narrow things down and hopefully make those improvements on my health by just saying, here's this, here's this, here's this.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, it's something I can admit that after reading the book, I felt more empowered to talk to my doctor.
Cool.
You know what I mean? So
Okay.
I think it did a really good job of illustrating exactly what you said. I mean, just making me think about all the places I've been, things I've done, things I've been exposed to. Like you brought up that point about the burnt, like the pit, like you throw batteries, you throw a radio, a chair, whatever. I mean, anything goes into these burn pits. I mean, it's not just like trash. It's not just trash in a trash can. It's anything that you don't want anymore goes into the burn pit, and it could be anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you guys did a phenomenal job of illustrating all that. And like Josh was alluding to, your stories are awesome. And, intermixing those with the data is fascinating in and of itself. But then, going back and forth I think you guys did a phenomenal job. I think it's like he said, it's a great read for sure.
Let me ask you a couple questions so
Okay.
that I can take some of the pressure off me.
Okay.
If you look do you do like reunions? Are you still pretty close with your crew?
Sometimes, yeah. And with the internet, I mean, we text all the time. You know what I mean? It's more like going in person is difficult, but we keep in touch via signal chats and that kind of stuff.
Do you find like if you look at like the aggregate, platoon, battalion, company, whatever, do you think overall that like the guys and gals I serve with are getting worse health-wise, mental, physical?
I guess it depends on the individual. I think that some have gotten a lot worse. Like we just lost a buddy who out of nowhere, had really bad cancer, and he wasn't expecting it, and it just kind of got sick real quick. And so it depends on who it is. Some guys are really doing well. But yeah, it's kind of hit and miss. But to your point, maybe the guys that are getting hit really hard are not expecting it. They're like, why would this be happening to me? And it just kind of comes out of nowhere. So yeah, it's really hit and miss. What about you? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm finding is like as I get better and I know more, I'm and I keep pretty good tabs on guys, but I just see worsening effects. And I also have like friends who are Vietnam vet. I had a couple of Korea World War II buddies. They're passing out. But what's wild to me about the similarities between like us and the Vietnam vets is also crazy contaminants. Like in their case was Agent Orange.
Sure.
And I know a lot of Vietnam vets who've just had like crazy hairy cell leukemia, and they smoked while they were in Nam, and then they quit, and they had like office jobs, so that it was like they're not getting exposed to other things, but the consequences of the service are just kind of slowly eating away at them.
Right.
And I think the reason why I was asking this, because I'd like to see more like of us. I mean, maybe if you were in a position of leadership and you still feel like you have some responsibility to your guys, is to try to do like informal things like that, or maybe to try to push the VA to do more surveys. Because what I've kind of, again, I'm not a doctor, right?
Right.
But I definitely played one in real life to get to this point.
You've done the research for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things that I keep like seeing again and again, especially with suicides and like severe depression, is like you have the severe overlap of all these things. Like you have trauma, exposures, and then TBI. And I've just kind of, I mean, thankfully it's not as, the 22 a day thing was never true, but one a day is bad, or it's like two, whatever.
Sure.
It's bad no matter what the number is.
Sure.
But I just see a lot of kind of crossover of these things all working together. And so I'm always just like, I wonder if what we're going to see with our generation, similar to what happened with the Vietnam vets, because there's been a lot of suicides of Vietnam vets. They're just like undercounted, is if we're going to see that just slowly kind of go up with the health going down over time. So sometimes it can be scary. Like that was one of my original things I was worried about in the writing of this book. Eventually when I got to the end and I was like kind of wrapped up with my story, but like thinking about the consequences of just pulling the trigger on this thing and letting it into the world, is it can be a little bit scary to think that there's this many things that could be wrong with me. And that's not the intent. The intent is it's solvable.
Sure.
But you've really got to lay these things out and try to follow them as far as you possibly can. And I think until we see some kind of like paradigm shift, not only in the VA, but like even in private medicine in America, I think we'll just see like bad outcomes for our cohort. And we know that the same thing happened with the Vietnam vets and World War II vets. As they aged, they needed more care through the system. And if they're not going to get it, then there's going to be bad outcomes for guys and gals and their family.
Yeah, that's why I hope people read this book. I mean, I'm not kidding. I'm not just trying to, it kind of sounds kind of hokey, but this book spoke to me, and I think it's going to speak to a lot of other guys. I think it's important that people read this book, not only for the for the medical portion of it, but also because it was a fascinating, fun read, and I think you guys did a great job on it. I think it's important that people read the whole thing and feel, kind of get some more ideas of what to say to the doc. Because like you said, I mean, there are times when we have these illnesses and we're like, we have no idea where they came from or what they are, and the doc doesn't know. This can kind of give some insight to some guys, and maybe it'll help, maybe it won't, but it'll at least give you the tools to get down that path to try to find a solution. Well, Alex, thanks a lot for coming on, man. This was great.
Sure, no sweat, JD. And if you got any questions, just shoot me an email.
Okay.
I have no idea what's going to happen, man. Like, I mean, obviously, like deep in my ex-platoon sergeant brain, I want to see like massive changes happen in the military and the VA. But you can only focus on your little lane and do your best there. So we'll see.
I think but to your point, I think all of us focusing on our little lanes end up having a big effect. So I think if we all kind of like pitch in and do our thing and do what we can to make change, I mean, that change will come.
I hope so. I mean, it's not going to come without real growing pains though.
For sure.
And Josh was mentioning the PACT Act earlier, and it's really critical. It's really great that it's there, but you got to remember about like the PACT Act it's saying, okay, you were near a burn pit, we're going to assume that you have these things, because there's no way scientifically to like test for these things unless
Right.
we take some fresh people off the street, we build some burn pits over here in my backyard, and we can make them breathe them in every day.
Right.
So that's where the fight's going to be, is we're going to have good research, but there's going to be a lot of like the more like lawyerly types and like the people who are at like compensation, who are going to be like, there's no way to prove that. And so I think we're at the beginning of kind of like with what happened with Agent Orange, of a battle that's probably going to last a little bit longer, but got to fight it.
Yeah.
You know, nobody should be, you can't guarantee anybody's safety in combat.
Right.
Like somebody's going to get a bayonet in the face or get blown up, but I do not believe anybody should be coming home and getting discharged and then be like, yeah, I have hairy cell leukemia from this, or I was exposed to this and now I'm sick. That's where I draw the line. I'm like, nah, fuck that.
Right.
That's something we should guarantee. And if we don't do that, that's the other thing now that I know will probably happen as a result of the book, because this is already happening right now amongst our generation, talking to younger guns like Gen Z, is they're going to see this and say, yeah, fuck joining up, because I might get poisoned.
Yeah.
And that's unacceptable.
So maybe that'll prompt the military to kind of change their ways. And, you know, as those recruiting numbers diminish, they're like, okay, now we got to figure something else out. Yeah.
They're already down.
They're already down now.
You know, so we can't have a force like that, man.
Right.
So I think that there's just like a lot. Again, that's why we don't really think the book is new. We've just presented it in a new way. And maybe that will get us all to the point where we can start solving the problems instead of just kicking the can on them.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. I don't know if you've like talked to young dudes or gals who are thinking about going in, and it's weird now. Like I was just shoot straight and tell people what's up. But where I'm like really more like, you need to think a lot longer about this is in your exposures. Like
Right.
This is going to be a part of your 4 to whatever years. And are you ready for your health to potentially be blown apart?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for the time, JD.
Yeah, you too. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks.
All right, man. Cool.
Okay.
I'll catch you later.